What's going on, Canucks fans? Irfaan Gaffar here alongside Harman for another summer episode of Canucks Conversation. Quads is on a very deserved vacation. Harm got back from a deserved vacation. We are coming to you from the iconic Wall Center in downtown Vancouver. Looking for your next meeting space? Contact the Wall Center for all of your event needs at wallcenter.com. And today's episode of Canucks Conversation, we got a lot to get into. We've got some news that just dropped, brought to you by Greta, the home of our electric watch parties during this season and our off season. It's the chill spot at this time of year. Make Greta your spot to eat, drink, and play this summer. Harm, what's going on? How are you, my friend?
Doing really well. It's starting to creep up that we're hitting the end of August, and once the calendar turns to September, I think Labor Day, especially, that's once the weekend's over, that's a sign of like, okay, hockey season's right around the corner. It works out nicely this year where they've got young stars and training camp both in Penticton, so that's going to be fun and exciting. And we've already got storylines and drama surrounding the Canucks, so that's always interesting to talk about.
No, absolutely. And the thing is, in this market, Harm, there will never be shortage of drama or storylines surrounding the Vancouver Canucks. Let's get to it. I think that we obviously know about Thatcher Demko and kind of his situation and what is going on there. But some interesting news came down from the hockey news. Artur Silovs is left off Latvia's Olympic roster to help his country qualify for the Olympics. That is some pretty significant news, both if you're the Vancouver Canucks and if you're Artur Silovs. Is it not, Harm?
Yeah, it's a sign that with the uncertainty around Demko, you don't want to be in a situation where you've got zero NHL goaltenders ready and you're potentially relying on Patera and Tolopilo. So it makes sense, right? And this isn't a light thing for Shilovs in Latvia to do, because the pride that Shilovs has representing his country, how much it means for the country when they had that success at the World Championships a year ago. So this isn't a decision that they made lightly, and I'm sure a lot of it is, if you're thinking about this from the Canucks standpoint, you really don't want a situation where you're potentially exposing him to injury risk and having potentially two goaltenders out heading into training camp preseason.
Yeah, and I think that you mentioned the uncertainty, right? Because I think that that's the biggest thing. We know Thatcher Demko is not healthy. The reports have been out that, he may have had a procedure. He may not have had a procedure. Is he going to be ready for the start of training camp? Is he going to be ready for the start of the regular season? Or is it going to be beyond that? So I think by looking at this and seeing from the Canucks point of view, them probably saying to Latvia and saying to Artur Silovs, hey, man, we're going to need you to be our guy. We're going to take it easy, maybe lay off a little bit, qualifying for the Olympics. I understand it's a dream, but, this is your job. We're paying you. You are going to be getting paid a lot of money eventually in your career, but this is your job, and we're going to need you to be our number one. So for him, looking at that and going into it, I think that that's the mindset you kind of have to take right now, don't you, if you're him?
Yeah, and for Shilovs too, this is potentially the opportunity of a lifetime.
Yeah.
Right? Every young goaltender wants that chance that, hey, if I perform well, I've got the ball and can roll with it and get a lot of starts. Whereas if Demko's healthy, yeah, of course, there was a lot of chatter about more balanced workload, but ultimately Shilov still wasn't going to be in a position where he's playing a ton of games and getting a 1A type treatment. Whereas now that opportunity is on the table. If he plays well in camp in preseason, he is the highest pedigree, highest ceiling goaltender within the organization right now outside of Demko. So for him as well, even from a personal standpoint, it changes the leverage of now you want to be extra dialed in, and you may not want to take risks from the player standpoint either.
When you look at it, Harm, obviously you covered this team all throughout the playoffs and kind of were around when Demko was on the ice and the reports out that, maybe he was going to play or be ready for round 3 had the Canucks got there. And then now you kind of hear what's been happening over the summer and what could potentially happen. What's your take on the situation?
Yeah, I mean, the reports that he hasn't skated in a while, the lack of a timetable, and of course, Rick Dhaliwal and Thomas Rance recently reporting that he's expected to miss training camp and preseason. It creates definitely some level of worry, some level of concern. Also, from the standpoint of course, Demko at some point will return, but the question then is going to be, how long can he stay healthy for even when he does return, right? Like that's going to be a storyline as well, especially because the injury that he suffered at the end of game one against Nashville, it was after he returned, right?
Mhm.
It was like we thought he's healthy, and part of it was maybe, hey, the excitement of wanting to get back for the playoffs, maybe, pushed a little bit too soon. But ultimately, like there's just uncertainty is the biggest is the best way to kind of just encapsulate like my thoughts around this whole situation. And again, it's a good thing that the Canucks have improved the floor of this team to where they can be competent through stretches without Demko. But again, their ability to play to their ceiling and be an actual cup contender rests on a healthy and productive Demko.
Yeah, and I think there's people in our YouTube chat right now kind of saying that depth and goal is so important. The future depends on it and things like that. But like you just mentioned, I think that we can both agree the work that Jim Rutherford and Patrick Alvin did this offseason drastically improved this hockey team. They are a much better team today, I think, than they were at the end of last season. So in that, you don't need elite goaltending for 82 games in the regular season, do you, Harm? You need it for game one of the playoffs, and you need to do everything you possibly can to make sure that number 35 is ready to go game one of the playoffs.
Well, it's also a couple things to keep in mind. The Pacific Division isn't stacked with elite goaltenders, right?
Yep.
Edmonton's rocking Stuart Skinner. In Vegas, Aiden Hill is as hot and cold as they come, right? He'll have stretches for 6 weeks where he plays like he's a top 5 goaltender, and then he'll have other stretches like the second half of the season where he gets hurt or he can't stop anything to save his life. Calgary lost Jacob Markstrom. San Jose gets Askarov, but they're not contenders, and he's not an established goaltender anyway. LA is banking on Darcy Kemper after he lost the starter's job in Washington, an aging goaltender there. So it's not like you're going up against in your division that you're going to have this huge disadvantage on paper. And even when you look at the schedule, right, the start of the season can always set the tone, set the tempo, right?
Mm-hmm.
We think about how Canucks came firing out of the gate, 8-1 against Edmonton. They got on that initial hot start in October, and it sort of just it built them up to a certain level of confidence and swagger. Well, I'm looking at the first 7 games of the season. Only 2 of them are against playoff teams, right? You got Calgary, Philadelphia, then you got Tampa and Florida, which those are difficult games. But afterwards, it's Philadelphia again, Chicago, and Pittsburgh. And again, in those matchups, the only elite goaltenders you're going up against are Vasilevsky and Bobrovsky if he's on. And this also matters in terms of like divisional games against good teams. Those are obviously higher leverage because those are essentially 4-point swings. If you lose to a team like LA versus win against them, same thing against Edmonton. Well, the first playoff Pacific Division team that they play is LA on November 7th and then Edmonton on November 9th. So they've got time to where, okay, maybe Demko isn't ready for the start of the season, but could he be ready at some point in November? I don't know, but at least in October, the schedule isn't too difficult. And I think this team has an opportunity to at least against some weaker teams, pick up points and just build confidence that, okay, even if we are missing Thatcher, that we're still a quality hockey team.
Okay, so how long is too long for Thatcher Demko to be out, or is it take as long as you need if you're the Vancouver Canucks and Thatcher Demko?
Well, first of all, you almost have to go with an approach of take as long as you need, because what happened when there was an accelerated timeline last time? He got hurt again after barely any time. So that has to be the first priority. Now, how long is too long? That's going to depend on a lot of factors that are also outside of Vancouver's control, right? Like the Canucks were, until the end of the season, remarkably healthy when it came to a lot of their core players. So you have to make sure that the rest of your core guys, Pedersen, Besser, Miller, Hughes, that these guys are hopefully healthy as healthy as possible. I also look at, as a reference point, when the Canucks lost Demko down the stretch after the All-Star break, large chunks of March. And I think they can hold their own, just looking at, like, they went 14 games and their record was 7-5-2, 94-point pace, which is enough to keep you around the playoff race. And the key thing that stands out is they still played at a mid 90s point pace, despite only ranking 23rd in that stretch in offensive scoring per game, and their power play was 18th. Remember, that was when Pettersson was really struggling. And so now that they've bolstered the forward group that they have, bringing in guys like DeBrusk and Heinen and Sprong and Sherwood, really improving their depth on the wings, hopefully getting a version of Pettersson that's more productive, healthier. Their offense, if it can elevate to a bit of a higher level, they can absolutely hold their own for a month, 2 months, 3 months. But again, it rests on a lot of those core guys staying healthy. The bigger question that I sort of have, though, is in this discussion of, well, they're going to need to be able to manufacture offense. Rick Tocchet spoke at times in the summer about, potentially tinkering his system, opening things up so that they maybe create a little bit more off the rush. Is the uncertainty around Demko going to disrupt the tweaks that they can implement in that department? Because rush chances, that it's the teams that defend the rush the best also typically aren't taking many rush chances like offensively, right? So if you want to produce more off the rush, sometimes that means giving up a little bit more off the rush. Are you going to be comfortable doing that without Thatcher Demko potentially in the equation? So honestly, a lot of the focal point is going to turn to the offense and the forwards and making sure that they can squeeze enough juice from that standpoint, because that was the bigger issue for them down the stretch and even at times in the playoffs.
No, absolutely. I want to ask you also about what the plan is next for goaltending here in just a second, but Nick Pelong and Adam Peddle host Bad for Baseball, the most unapologetic, in-your-face baseball podcast that delivers weekly, unfiltered takes on the good and the bad around MLB and the world of baseball. Since 2020, Nick and Adam have been entertaining Blue Jays fans with their commentary and live streams on their YouTube channel, Blue Jays Today. But their love of baseball goes much deeper than just one team. After the Shohei Ohtani free agency drama, the guys knew they needed an outlet to talk ball outside of their hometown. New episodes of Bad for Baseball drop every Monday, Tuesday on their Bad for Baseball YouTube channel or wherever you stream your podcast. I got a baseball bet, but we'll get to that at the end of the show. What I wanted to get to you next as we continue this goaltending conversation here on Canucks Conversation. So the level of importance now, Harm, to go and acquire a veteran backup or someone that might be able to come in and back up Artur Silovs if Demko, if it is a month, if it is 2 months. Because, so much talk in the last couple of weeks of it has been about Kevin Lankinen. Well, the guy sitting there made $2 million and he still has no job, right? And there's a reason for that. So if you're the Vancouver Canucks, how creative do you have to get, and how much of a need is it for you to go and try and, shore up that position, at least until Demko's healthy?
See, this is where it gets tricky, because if you had a timeline of like, it's going to be, X amount of weeks that he's estimated to be out, then you have certainty. Whereas in this case, again, I mean, maybe the Canucks have more clarity internally, but at least from what we know publicly, there isn't a real timetable or timeline on that. Because, for example, going out and signing a guy like Lankinen, who has been proven, who has really strong underlying numbers, it's attractive, and yet there are potential sacrifices that come with that, right? Because if you're going out and signing him to something closer to a $2 million cap hit, then you probably have to place Pullman on LTIR. You can't accrue cap space during the season, and then you get to a point where at the deadline it's going to be more difficult to make moves, right? Because when the Canucks went out and acquired Zadorov, right, or when they acquired Lindholm, don't forget that they had to shed contracts out to make it possible, because they were in LTIR, right? They had to get off Beauvillier. They had to get off Kuzmenko as part of the Lindholm trade. Well, looking at the Canucks roster right now, they don't have really any undesirable contracts that you'd look at and go, all right, if at the deadline we want a top 4 right-handed defenseman, right? And this hypothetical defenseman, let's say he makes $5 million. Well, what contract on the books are you going to move out on the roster to be able to afford a player with that type of cap hit? And so it's like, do you want to handcuff yourself? And that's why, for me, I would almost take a slower approach, kind of wait and see. Again, I've talked about waivers as a as a possibility, poaching another team's, a third goaltender and kind of potentially rolling the dice that way, where unless you're talking about a scenario where he's missing months, I think you can get away. Like, I would prioritize keeping your cap flexibility so that you can make moves at the deadline over spending significantly over $1 million on a more proven guy.
Here's my thing I always say when it comes to surgeries and things like that, and if there was a procedure. So if Thatcher Demko did have a procedure and the Canucks had a timeline out of it of 3 to 6 months, or it would have been longer or anything like that, they probably would have said something in the summer. I think that's usually the way that most teams go and operate, especially when it comes to their star players, their Vezina nominee, Vezina caliber star goaltender. So if he did have the procedure that might have been minor, yeah, this could be something that holds him out of training camp and the preseason. And you know what? For a guy that might not need training camp and preseason and who's been told for so long by so many people his workload is a little bit too much, even the president of hockey operations for the Vancouver Canucks said that, maybe he was working a little bit too hard and needs to ease up a bit. This is a good thing. So we'll see what happens. But, I don't obviously discount reporting and what's been happening there, but it's definitely going to be an interesting one to watch. One that we're definitely not going to take our eyes off of, because goaltending heading into this season, or heading into the last couple of seasons, has been a strength of the Vancouver Canucks. So it's going to be fun. Again, it's going to be fun in training camp in Penticton, and I assume that you'll be there, Harm. But there's a lot of other things that need to go on and happen for this team outside of goaltending, and a lot of new faces in different places. What was that?
Just one more thing I wanted to point out, just as I'm sort of thinking about and processing this deeper, and I don't know if you agree or disagree. For me, with all of this sort of speculation around Demko, the bigger worry for me isn't the possibility that, he may miss, let's say a month or 2 months, and how are the Canucks going to adjust in that time frame. For me, it's the worry of, okay, whenever he does come back, can I trust this guy to stay healthy? Like, it's not like once he's back that you've got a guarantee that you've got Demko for the rest of the regular season, the playoffs. Now it starts to creep into my mind that, does he have legit durability concerns, and how much can we trust this guy, and what impact does that have for the most important games of the year down the stretch and in the playoffs? It's more for me a bigger picture question mark and concern that I have, rather than the immediate, like, what impact is this going to have for this team in October and November?
I think that question has already been posed, to be completely honest. I think that there's been conversations about that already in some circles, and maybe not in the highest offices at Rogers Arena, but there's definitely people that have talked about it and the durability. And look, he's going to come back at some point this season. Is he going to be as good as he possibly can be? He's going to definitely try. The thing that interests me, though, like, if he comes back and has a really, really, really good start to whenever he comes back and starts to playing, are the Canucks going to say no to go and play for your country at the Four Nations in Montreal and Boston for Team USA? Because he's probably going to be named to the roster. Maybe not as a starter. It's probably Connor Hellebuck's job, but you assume that Thatcher Demko is going to be part of that team that, represents the United States of America. Anyways, these are conversations that we're going to have way further down the road. But yes, I wanted to get into newer faces in new places and expectations surrounding the Vancouver Canucks. There's going to be a lot. Elias Pettersson's an easy answer for us to go to and say, what does he need to prove? Does he need to prove to himself? He's got the big contract now, got the signing bonus. He's probably going to be dependent on a lot in the regular season, so we can leave that one aside. But of the new guys, of the new forwards, in a Daniel Sprong, and a Jake DeBrusk, and a Danton Heinen, who do you think the Canucks or fans should expect to have the biggest impact on this team moving forward, or this season?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious, I'll give you two. Like, the main one obviously is DeBrusk, right?
Yeah.
And seeing how well he can click with Pettersson, not only because of what it could do for his own game, and looking at the 1 year that he spent a lot of time with Bergeron, his production was like, he missed games during that season, but he was playing at like a high 30 goal pace. So playing next to Elias Pettersson consistently, if he can stay healthy, what does that do for his ceiling and potentially hitting 30 plus goals? And also for Pettersson too, is now he's got a finisher that that he can trust. And how many times did we see scoring chances die on Ilya Mikheyev's stick, or the ineffectiveness of Andrei Kuzmenko early in the season? So that, like, those two, it's not just that you're looking for them to find a fit, but especially now that there's these question marks around Demko, and now you may not necessarily have elite goaltending to start the year, you're going to need your offense firing. And so it's not just, can you find chemistry by game 40? It's, can you really be productive by the start of the season? And so that's where, in training camp and preseason, there's obviously going to be a huge spotlight on DeBrusk and what impact he can have. As a sleeper, I'm really intrigued by Kiefer Sherwood for a couple of reasons. I already just like him as it is, his floor case scenario, in the sense of, he brings grit, he brings energy, he's annoying on the forecheck, he helps give that fourth line a little bit more identity. But also, as I was looking deeper into his production profile, and again, small sample size, but his point production rate was really, really high last year for Nashville, relative to how few minutes he played. So is this a guy that can be like, earlier at times last year, when certain lineup combinations weren't working, and a guy like Sam Lafferty had to move up the lineup, and it wouldn't really give the juice or the spark that the Canucks were looking for? Well, can Sherwood be that, like, plan B, C, or D option that at times can move up the lineup and actually give you a little bit more offense than what he showed last season? Because for me, with Danton Heinen, he's more of a proven commodity, in the sense that you kind of know what you're going to get from him. Around 15 goals, solid two-way player, Pius Suter like, in that he's going to be reliable, low maintenance. Whereas Sherwood is more of just kind of an X factor. You don't fully know what his potential is yet, just because his NHL resume is shorter. And it wasn't too long ago in the AHL that he was lighting it up points wise as well.
Yeah, I think that there's so many. Like, I think Danton Heinen for sure is going to be an interesting one. Jeff Patterson made up a good point last season, and kind of into the offseason, the Canucks had too many guys on the fourth line that were, what can you do for me guys? Like, what do you really do when you're out there? But now you look at Heinen, you look at Kiefer Sherwood. I mean, Daniel Sprong's going to play up and down the lineup. You know exactly what you're going to get out of those types of players. And I think that they went and addressed a desperate need for the bottom six of that forward group. So it should be interesting to see. Jake DeBrusk and Elias Pettersson, I think that that's the one to watch, right? You know, you're going to get JT Miller and Brock Besser, and then the others, right? Like, where in the world is Niels Höglander going to play? Like, on daily faceoff, he's slated in on that top line with JT Miller and Brock Besser, but as quick as he is in the penthouse, he can definitely go in the doghouse under Rick Tocchet, right, Harm?
No question. And honestly, I look right now at Danton Heinen as a potential sort of like front runner for that job, just because you know that chances are Miller and Besser are going to be trusted to, like, how often do they get the McDavid matchup against the Oilers, right? So would you trust more of a Niels Höglander in that role, or a Danton Heinen? And for me, if Höglander is going to win a top six spot, the more realistic avenue for him might be to do it on that line with Pettersson, right? Because disappointing playoff, but from the All-Star break till the end of the regular season, he was basically glued to Pettersson. And the Canucks didn't have a ton of alternative options, but he was genuinely playing well. He was genuinely driving play. And again, it was at a time where Pettersson wasn't clicking. It was at a time where Pettersson wasn't dynamic. And so Höglander from time to time had to be a spark plug, and he showed flashes there. So whether it's him or whether it's Daniel Sprong, that's the other part of it too, is we're focusing a lot on the potential connection between Pettersson and DeBrusk and how those guys need to find chemistry. The third winger, or the third forward that's going to join that line is also going to be a huge part of it. Is, can Höglander or Sprong, both guys that have shown sparks of offense, but also have question marks in terms of defensive reliability and consistency, can one of those guys catch fire out of the gate and help take that second line to an even higher level?
What's a realistic expectation for Daniel Sprong? I think a lot of people, when they made that signing, was like, okay, low risk, could be a pretty high reward here, but what's a realistic expectation, do you think?
Well, for me, it all rests on, can he be be even trusted as an everyday player under
Yeah.
Rick Tocchet, right? Because we saw the Kuzmenko saga, and obviously it's in this case because Sprong makes so little, it doesn't matter, right? It's not going to be a controversy if Sprong ends up in the press box, but there are non-negotiables that Tocchet consistently harps on, and I even remember times in the locker room chatting with a guy like Connor Garland who has experience with Tocchet from Arizona even, and it's like certain things like reloading on the back check and being able to win your wall battles. Tocchet, unless you're going to be a guy that can put up 30, 40 goals, unless you're that caliber of an offensive player, which Daniel Sprong isn't, you're going to at least need to be competent in all of those other details. So to me, that's the first question I ask is can he be trustworthy enough in that spot? And then from there, it's a guy that is kind of going to move up and down the lineup at times, that I look at for 15 to 20 goals. Probably going to be a guy that's parked on the bench when you're holding leads, but that's fine, right? You can afford to have an offensive sort of like one-dimensional guy if he's league minimum, and you have other wingers in the bottom six that are more defensively responsible that can step up the lineup and play more minutes when it's time to defend leads. The intriguing thing for me with Sprong is what can you do for the second unit power play? It felt like the second unit power play last year was missing that shooting threat from the flank, and the lack of, like, whether you had Suter or Mikheyev or Höglander in these shooting positions down low, it almost felt like they knew that none of these guys can beat goalies from distance. So they just kept feeding Hronek up top. And it's really tough to beat no matter how hard of a shot you have. It's really tough to beat goalies from the point. So now to have Sprong potentially on that left flank on his one-timer side, where he's both got the one-timer, but also he's got a quick release deceptive shot. Can he be the shot that you build your second unit power play around? And because as much as we focused on the first unit struggles down the stretch, the second unit wasn't really contributing much either.
Yeah, no, I think that that's probably one of the things when you look at how beefy their top six are and really what they can do. And now there's options, right? That second power play unit can come out and actually give the first power play unit a little bit of rest. They don't need to be out there for a minute 30 and a minute 35, even though as much as they want to do that and want to be able to do that. Time now for our Pulse question, Harm, brought to you by Bet365. Obviously, continuing on the goaltending talk and what's been going on with the Vancouver Canucks and their goaltending. Our poll question is, how concerned are you about the Canucks' current goaltending situation? Very mildly or not at all? What do you think is winning, Harm, right now? Very mildly or not at all?
Well, I can see the results on the screen.
On the screen. I didn't see that. Sorry, I had another screen open.
I should have just said mildly to make myself seem smarter, but I'm not surprised that mildly is winning out. I honestly feel like if the options had been changed and there was more like something in between very and mildly, like a moderately option, I feel like that would have won out. Where even just anecdotally running into Canucks fans in person or friends that I know that really follow the team, they're intrigued about it. They want to know about the goaltending situation. It's definitely a talking point, but it's not something that I sense that fans are really panicking about in the sense of like, oh no, what's going to happen to the team's performance at the start of the season. That's kind of the vibe that I get, both in person and judging based off this poll questions responses too.
Do you think it's because of the moves that they made in the offseason that people are generally more excited, that they know that their team is better in front of whatever goaltender plays?
I do. I think also between Tocchet, Rutherford, Alvin, they've earned a lot of sort of trust, and I think that's massive in this market, right? They've got proof of concept that, okay, this is a team that from Jan 1 onward was elite defensively, and again, the offseason moves that they made consistently across the board, I hear nothing but really good things said by fans, and that kind of mirrors, I think, what we in the media feel, that this was an offseason where the moves that they made to upgrade the forward group particularly were sharp. They were calculated. They didn't overextend and hand out risky contracts. And now you're looking at a forward group now that hopefully can deliver a little bit more offense, with the only lingering question mark for me being the blue line's potential puck moving and zone exits. They definitely addressed in bringing in guys like Desharnais and Forbort, penalty killers, players with size that can break up the cycle, defend the front of the net, clog the middle of the ice. But can they escape their own end and be a team that can make sure that the puck gets into the hands of those talented forwards in the first place? That's kind of the lingering question mark that I have.
No, yeah. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, I'm kind of with you with mildly a little bit. I think that this team is better. I think that Demko is going to come back at some point this season. And if, we know Thatcher Demko from covering him and seeing the way that he works and operates, he's going to be a motivated guy. He's going to be a guy that wants to come back and prove that he can play at that Vezina caliber, where he was at. But it's going to be fascinating to watch. I really do think that. I think that there's so many storylines surrounding this team. And goaltending is definitely going to be the biggest one. I even talked about the off-ice goaltending issues, but we don't need to get to that on today's show. As our poll question brought to you by Bet365, a proud partner of Canucks Conversation. Open an account with Bet365 today and bet on our huge range of markets. Whatever the sport, whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. Be sure to use code VANBONUS when you sign up for an account. I was going to ask you, there's so much talk about this team and the goaltending, and we just went on and on and on about, the forward groups and expectations. What about this defense, Harm? And, you and I think have talked about it and named on a couple of different shows as well. They got to still be wanting on that wish list at some point to add a top 4 defenseman, do they not?
Yeah, for sure. If they're going to go deep in the playoffs, the biggest, most obvious need to me right now is another top 4 defenseman on that right side, right? Because Tyler Myers in the top 4 role, he was fine there, but he's getting up there in age, and I don't want that for the Canucks be the first choice in game 1 of the playoffs. And as much as this front office has said that they believe Vinny Desharnais has untapped potential, ultimately, I still look at him as a bottom pair guy. So if they can acquire a guy to pair with Soucy, especially because when I think back to the playoffs and all the discussion around the lack of offensive production, a big part of it too was looking at the underlying numbers. They couldn't generate shots. They couldn't generate chances when the second or third pairs were on the ice. And I think a big part of it is, when I look at Carson Soucy's skill set as a matchup defender, I really like him as a number 4 stay-at-home kind of like shutdown guy, and his puck skills are fine. But if you can pair him with a guy that has some pace, has some ability, that can push the pace legitimately, then all of a sudden your second pair isn't just in prevent defense mode all the time. It's you can get up the ice and actually create offense, right? And at times in the Edmonton series, it sort of felt like, okay, this team is under siege and they're doing a great job of the bend but don't break style defense, and they're clogging the middle. But at a certain point, you've got to be able to generate a lot yourselves, especially the deeper you get into the playoffs and you run into stingy defensive teams. That absolutely is the number one sort of need that I would be looking at when it comes to the deadline and potential moves that they could make. And it's going to be really interesting because that's I shouldn't even say arguably, that's the number one need for the Oilers as well on the right side of the defense after Evan Bouchard. So now you've got two Pacific Division rivals that they're not just jockeying with each other in terms of the standings and potentially meeting each other in the playoffs again if both teams obviously get there. It's now come to the deadline. Both of these teams could be in a bidding war for whatever rental defenseman shake loose, and what could that mean for the potential prices that each side has to pay. And it's also interesting because just as we're talking about Tucker Pullman and wanting to avoid LTIR so you can accrue cap space, looking at how the Oilers handled the Broberg and Holloway offer sheets and the fact that they moved off CC's contract and yet didn't match either offer sheet, that tells you that they really value not having to put Kane on LTIR so that they can accrue cap space. And and add that top flight defender as well. So it's pretty similar situations, and it's going to make for really interesting on and off the ice storylines.
No, absolutely. And that's kind of what makes this fun, right? I mean, look, you mentioned it, it's almost September, the month is almost turned, and the leaves are going to start falling and hockey season is going to be here. So what better way to kick it off than, some hot fire coming right your way right away for the Vancouver Canucks. Also wanted to let everybody know that we didn't do Canucks Family Feud today. So make sure you submit your survey responses for next week's Family Feud episode. It is in our YouTube channel, so make sure you definitely go to that and fill that out. It's a fun thing that you and Quads do, but definitely interested, and more people should definitely sign up for that. But now, time for Anyone Else Harm, presented by the Vancouver Canadians. The Seas are on the road this week, but return for their regular season homestand of the season, starting next Tuesday, September 3rd, in a race to win the second half in the Northwest League. Every game matters for the Canadians. Check out the Nooner at the Nat on Friday, the 6 fireworks on Saturday night, and on the 7th of September. Those games will all be fun. Tickets are very hard to get, so make sure you go and try and get them early. Don't wait. 604-872-5332, or go to CanadiansBaseball.com. Lots of segments for our Anyone Else. The first one I wanted to get to was from Lefty All Around. Kind of going to paraphrase this question a little bit. Would you rather watch a game at a game, or if you're working it on TV to kind of get the most out of the game? Where do you prefer to watch the game?
There are pros and cons. I'd say watching from the press box, you get a better sense of kind of like the atmosphere, the feel of the building, and the emotional swings, momentum, all those types of things. You get a better view of players away from the puck, so that can help you, like watching a team break out or forecheck. You're able to pick up more details than you otherwise would, and just also if you're trying to focus on, okay, how's this guy looking on this line, you're able to pick up on, okay, what routes is this player taking away from the puck. You're able to understand how they think the game a little bit better, their hockey IQ. I think it's definitely better for evaluating systems and teams and players. And also obviously going to the game afterward, you're in the locker room, so you're able to kind of, something you notice in the game, you can walk up to a guy and ask him a question, whether it's with the cameras or off the record type thing. So that's definitely preferable. Watching from TV, the biggest advantage I would say is you're like, I keep my streaming open, and so I'm able to kind of rewatch plays a lot. And I notice sometimes when I'm watching over video that I don't know, sometimes I track the flow of the game just a little bit better, just because there's not as much going around. And again, in terms of the crowd, other people in the press box that you're chatting with, and also making observations with. So I'd say I definitely prefer the press box. But there are times where kind of like the peace and the quiet of watching from your laptop or from a TV, and again, just constantly being able to watch the game at your own pace, and kind of like pause, restart, go back 10 seconds. That can have some advantages too.
Yeah, I think the only thing for me is that it's the replays. I think other than that, everything else is, we are very fortunate to be able to go to games in the press box and sit there and watch the games and get a feel for it and everything that comes along with it. So it's definitely being at the game for me. Going back to what we just talked about, anyone else from Sean S. Rasmus Andersson will be the target of 30 plus teams. What do you think it'll cost the Canucks to get him? Höglander plus a first. Your thoughts? It's going to be interesting, because if he is, and the Canucks and the Oilers are in a bidding war for a Calgary Flame, how fun would that be if you're Craig Conroy?
That'd be so funny. And I don't think this would actually happen, but no. Every Canucks fan would be hoping that, all right, Calgary's hopefully asking for extra from Edmonton, and all else being equal, would prefer to send him to Vancouver. But I mean, first of all, the question is, like, is Calgary even going to be open to that idea? Because a lot of times we have teams that it doesn't look like Calgary is completely like Chicago style tearing it down, where they're trying to trade away every decent player. And I could easily see Andersson being the type of piece that you keep around as a veteran leader, especially because it seems like he really likes it there. So number one, Calgary needs to be willing and actually looking to shop him. After that, I mean, I haven't had a chance to look at comps. The interesting thing here is you don't often see right shot defensemen with 2 years left on their deal, top pair caliber, available in the market. So when you're talking about Höglander first, like that's not going to do it. I don't think they're look from the Flames perspective. If I'm thinking about it, I'm looking at Höglander and going, he's a decent young forward, but he's not like a blue chip piece that has elite potential that is consistently going to be at the top of my lineup or be a star or anything. And a first round pick, at least judging based off the success the Canucks had last year, that's probably a late first. So if I'm Calgary and I'm shopping him, whether it's to Vancouver or Edmonton or wherever, I'm looking at, like, I want in a borderline kind of elite blue chip type prospect. And so if it's the Canucks, it's like my ask would be like a first round pick and one of Lekaramaki or Willander. So that's the type of neighborhood that I'd be looking at if I was Calgary and looking to move him. And that's where like the cost is going to be exorbitant, and you definitely expect there to be a bidding war if he ends up landing on the market.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure the Flames will want to send him to one of, if not either of these two places. But yeah, I mean, Craig Conroy, if it does get to that point, I mean, Conroy's got all the leverage in the world to probably get whatever he wants from a lot of teams for that player. There was one here that I saw from Jack Maloney. How much would you add to get rid of Tucker Pullman and his contract? Or what would it take?
Really good question. A third or fourth round pick is kind of what I think about, because if you can get off that contract, now if you're worried about Demko, you can sign Lankinen and you have an insurance policy, assuming of course that he'd be willing to sign here. And so it's like, what do you value that type of addition at? And again, to me, it's sort of, third or fourth round pick. But whether it's realistic that another team would actually want to take that contract on at that price, that's harder to say at this juncture.
Yeah, no, and I think that's just, I don't know if the Canucks are really willing to go down that road. I don't know if they're wanting to get rid of picks and things like that to go there and do that. Hell of a shot. Sprong, Sutter, Sherwood could potentially be a really fast, really good line. What do you think there? I mean, Sherwood and Suter would have to be carrying the load for Sprong's skating ability, but I think that, that could work. The triple S line.
Maybe, yeah. I guess I like the fit of Suter better with Garland and Joshua potentially, because I think Suter can be just a better finishing version of Teddy Bluger. So even though Bluger and Garland and Joshua obviously have chemistry, I'd want to give Suter the first shot there, especially because, again, Suter had some success there for a handful of games before he got hurt, and then it was Bluger in that spot. So that immediately sticks out. And also, that wouldn't be a fast line, right? Like, Sprong is a below average skater, and Suter does a lot of things well. He's incredibly smart, savvy. He's not fast. I if anything, I think he's a below average skater. I think the only guy there that has pace and tenacity on that line is Sherwood. Now, could that line work in terms of just controlling play and being productive in your bottom six? I like the look of that as a fourth line. If Bluger ends up centering the third line, but that doesn't stand out to me as a combination that I'm like, oh, I really want to see the three S's together.
Yeah, I'm just looking at it just right now. Daily face-off. Canucks projected lines here: Höglander, JT Miller, Brock Besser, DeBrusk, Pettersson, Sprong, Joshua, Bluger, Garland, Heinen, Suter, Sherwood. Like, I don't know if I really have a problem with any of that, except maybe Heinen is probably going to end up getting the best opportunity to play on that top line. But beyond that, like, I think they're going to want to keep that third line together. Sprong, you're probably going to want to put him in a position to succeed. He's buddies with Elias Pettersson, so why not have him play on that wing, at least to start, or to try in training camp? You brought DeBrusk to play with Pettersson, and JT Miller and Brock Besser just don't go away from each other.
Yeah, I like that idea. And this is what I love about camp and preseason is you've got time to kind of experiment with different combinations. And it's fun for us in late August and early September to kind of speculate and come up with certain combinations, but there are always surprises in camps. Also, not just like also possibilities that we don't see that the coaching staff wants to experiment with, and so that's again a lot of the intrigue around camp and why it's so exciting to follow and cover.
Here's one. Okay, you talk about surprises and intrigue. This guy only has an AHL contract, but he's going to be given a PTO for the Vancouver Canucks. Sammy Blais. If he makes the team, does he have a shot of making the team? And then he's also going to need an NHL contract.
I think he's on the outside looking in, to be honest. I think his best shot would be go down to Abbotsford, have a heck of a run there, and when injuries inevitably strike, be one of those players that's knocking on the door, and hopefully from his perspective, wanting to get ahead of other potential winger call-up options like the Archie Bains of the world, Linus Karlsson, names like that. Because looking at the roster right now, and this is part of the reason that they had to move Podkolzin out, there's just a lot of bodies that they probably don't want to expose to waivers. Talkett's always had a soft spot for PDG, just as a reliable, low-maintenance guy. And then you also turn to Nils Aman, who gives you the positional versatility of playing center and also some penalty killing. So Blais, I think he'd need a monster of a camp to enter the conversation of making the team out of camp, and I don't think it's very likely.
Confusion in our YouTube chat. That's actually the name of the person that is that's putting this question out there. I have trust in Silovs with Demko until December. Simply put, with Demko healthy and taking over by November, I go from confident to scared. What do you think?
Sorry, I'm trying to wrap my head around that.
Yeah, so am I. I have trust in Silovs without Demko until December. So for that far,
I think he mixed up November and December.
He must have mixed up November and December.
Yeah, I think he said
until November.
Yes, he has trust until November. If it's still Silovs, no Demko in December, that's when he gets scared.
Okay, if Demko doesn't play until December, Harm, what are your thoughts?
Well, this is where it's too bad Quads isn't here, because like for me with goaltenders, goalies are voodoo, man. Like this is when
Quads is the vibe guys though. He's the vibes guy too.
Yeah. Well, for example, when Casey DeSmith got hurt, Trance and I were in Nashville, and it was obviously unfortunate. But the other thing we thought was, have the Canucks really downgraded a net with Silovs? Like he's a young, high ceiling type of guy. Like he may pop off and immediately find his stride, or he may implode. Like who knows? It's a goaltender. Goalies are voodoo. That's why you have stories like Binnington coming up and all of a sudden being a rock star from the AHL to leading you to the Stanley Cup. Like you don't know. Silovs could come in and he could play at a similar level that he showed in the playoffs and be totally fine for you, and you have confidence and the team doesn't run into too many hiccups in the goaltending position. Or because he's young, because he's still raw and inexperienced, maybe there's a scenario where he struggles and he doesn't have a long track record of professional success, and maybe you are in more trouble than you think. This is where, for me, I'm not going to try and make predictions of certain months of like if the injury lasts this long, then I start getting worried.
There's just no point in doing that. I mean, I really don't think there is. I think other people can wrap their head around it, and you're just going to have to wait and see. I think that's the biggest thing. Look, they improved their hockey team. I don't want to say in case of this, but they got better, and because of one of these reasons. If in fact a goalie goes down, right, their team is better. I think that they do need to improve defensively. I agree with you. I think a top 4 defenseman, if you can go out and make it work at some point this season, you definitely want to do that. But from what I know and understand, that there was always an indication that they wanted to look for a goalie right when the season ended for next year. That's why they tried to sign Casey DeSmith. He went and got the money in Dallas, right? That's why they tried to do that, for reasons like this. So it's going to be fun. It's going to be a challenge for a guy like Silovs. And I think that, he's shown nothing but having confidence, going out there and playing his game, being that happy-go-lucky kid that we know that he is. And he's living out his dream, playing in the NHL. And now heading into training camp, by all reports, you're going to be the starting goaltender for the Vancouver Canucks for the regular season. So it's a pretty interesting way to go about things. And obviously, one that he has to wrap his head around.
It's not just Silovs. I think a lot of the onus is also going to come down to starting with your best players, we can't take for granted the level that they played at last year.
Yep.
Right. Of course, a lot of the pressure and discussion around best players is okay. Elias Pettersson, he's going to need to be on his A game, but also JT Miller had the best year of his career. Brock Besser had the best year of his career. Those guys need to continue playing at the level of being one of the better first lines in the NHL. Even further down the lineup, guys like Garland and Joshua, they need to be productive and really driving play and playing closer to their best case scenario of their potential and their ceiling. It's a lot of these, like Nils Höglander, another example. Great year last year. Can he continue performing at that type of level and maybe even take another step? That's the other part of it, is so many guys had career years. How many of them can at least come close to replicating that? Because you're in a spot where like Quinn Hughes, another example, like won the Norris Trophy, right? There's a subtle but noticeable difference between if a guy's playing at I'm going to win the Norris Trophy versus you're a top 5 or top 10 defenseman in the NHL.
Yep.
Right. So can Hughes again play at this? I'm dominating, and every time I step on the ice sheet, I'm the best player on the ice. Those are the other factors that I'm kind of looking at.
Yeah, I think that for Quinn Hughes, obviously, a lot of hype around him and the NHL cover and all of that, and then coming in and wanting 92-point season, Norris Trophy coming in, he's obviously going to want to replicate it. The interesting one for me is JT Miller. He can score as many goals as he did last season. Brock Besser, you're probably going to see a little bit of a decrease in the goal production, but a realistic expectation. Like, we got to think 30 now for Brock, right? That's the bare minimum, Harm.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a level that, again, assuming he's healthy, you're expecting 30 plus from him based off the level that he played at last year and chemistry. If he's going to be full time with JT Miller and Miller's playing really well, that's the bar that he needs to clear.
And then I think that if you're a fan and you're going at it, looking at it, and you're Googling stats of Danton Heinen and Jake DeBrusk and Daniel Sprong, you can get excited because all these players can play and play at a high level, but there's going to be some realistic expectations. I mean, you're going to need to find a guy that's going to be another 20 goal scorer on this team. So can it be DeBrusk? I don't think he's going to get to 30, maybe 18 to 20 is in that range. I mean, we saw Dakota Joshua had a really good season. It was contract season Dakota Joshua last season and playoff Dak, and we heard all of that. But he's another guy that might fly under the radar because he was able to go and do what he did. But the Canucks brought in so much other talent that, people are still going to expect a lot out of number 81, no?
Definitely. And Joshua may still have a little bit of upside where, for example, on the second year power play, he didn't really get much of an opportunity at the net front. I think we all remember the highlight reel goal when he finally did sort of get a chance there against Anaheim through the legs. He shot at a high shooting percentage. There's going to be some regression there, but can that be offset by him taking on a bigger role in the power play and then also just his minutes going up at 5-on-5, right? Where maybe he's more of a middle six forward in terms of usage. And we saw that towards the end of the year, right? Like being on the ice in 6-on-5 situations, offensively and defensively, being just kind of trusted more in every type of situation. And now what can that do for his confidence level? And, it's a trajectory where he's already been that like late bloomer against all odds, unexpected kind of breakout for him to even get to this point. Is there another, like a minimal step that he can take in being not only a driver, but also a producer, where you look at him and go, he's not just a good third liner, but now he's playing at the level of a fringe second liner, but on the third line, obviously. So he's going to be an intriguing guy to sort of watch as well.
Final one for anyone else. Thank you for all your submissions. And obviously, make sure you go and submit your survey responses for next week's Family Feud segment. Harm, who will lead the team in scoring this season?
I'm going to bank on Elias Pettersson. I think he's healthy. I think a lot of people forget that he was on pace for 47 goals and 107 points heading into the All-Star break. It was only a year ago that he led the team with 102 points, and he was the best player. He wasn't just the best forward. He was better than Quinn Hughes during that season. I think he's gonna, especially now that he has more talented help around him. I think he's got the potential to lead this team in scoring, especially because I don't expect a big drop off for JT Miller, but just looking under the hood, he was riding a really high on ice shooting percentage, really high individual shooting percentage. Brock Besser had, a 40 goal type year that he may not be able to repeat. It's like everything went perfectly for Miller, whereas I think a lot went against Pettersson last year. And so I wonder if those circumstances change, and I'm banking on Pettersson to lead this team in scoring.
Yeah, you know what? I'm gonna have to agree with you. I really do. I think he's got a lot to prove, and I think most of it is to himself, right? He was angry. He didn't like the way that things ended last season. He heard the noise. He heard people talk all about him. Obviously myself included, about what is a different Elias Pettersson in the playoffs and things like that. But I think he's going to come back motivated. I think the contract now is going to weigh, and if you get paid, you're going to be a guy that's depended on and a guy that's leaned on to produce for your team. So. Yeah, I'm going with Elias Pettersson as well. Harm, thanks for this. Time now for our Bet365 Bet of the Day, brought to you by Bet365. I'm going to the Diamond. Aaron Judge, heard of him? He's pretty good at baseball. Aaron Judge for a home run and Shohei Ohtani to just get 2 hits, 2-leg parlay there, pays at plus 758. So $25 gets you almost $258, I think, which is a pretty good odds there for 2 guys that have been absolutely smashing the baseball this season, Harm.
Yeah, I escaped quads, but I couldn't escape the baseball talk and bets, apparently.
No. Well, I'm not asking you for your opinion on the Mariners. I'm just saying that's what we got. I wasn't going to put a future on Quinn Hughes to win the Norris Trophy again. Let's say that. But anyways, that was our...
Actually, if Quads is doing the show today, he may have thrown like a long shot Vezina on Silovs.
No, I should have looked for that. He wouldn't even be. I don't think he'd be able to find it anywhere.
But apparently, you can get custom odds. I wonder if you would have been able to do it that way. But
it might be worth the money if you believe that much. But that was our bet of the day, brought to you by Bet365. Be sure to use the code VANBONUS when you sign up for an account. Must be 19 plus to play. If you choose to play, please play responsibly. Always a pleasure to be joined by you, Harm. Enjoy the rest of your summer. We look forward to seeing you and reading what you have to write, and seeing you right around training camp, my brother.
Thanks. This was a lot of fun, man.
All right, man. That was Canucks Conversation for Wednesday, August 28th.
Canucks Conversation is live Monday through Friday, every weekday at 2 p.m. over on the Canucks Army YouTube channel. Make sure you like, subscribe, and interact in the YouTube live chat every day with us, folks.